The urban legend for the Witch of Parley's Hollow was that there was this lady who lived in this like decrepit house in Parley's Hollow.
That's Jennifer Jones, who writes the blog, The Dead History.
And she like never came out of the house except when it was like dark out. Every now and then, people might see her outside, but kids would kind of make it a challenge to see if they could either hear her playing the piano or see her playing the piano through the window.
A 1999 Deseret News article shared an account of a local who said his parents had warned him to never go near the house in Parley's Hollow, referring to the strange woman who lived there as Crazy Mary. He said, "We used to crawl around there and sit in the bushes, but we'd only go near the house." Another local in the same article remembered going up to the house as a teenager and said you could see her playing a piano buried in concrete in her front room. She would play from midnight till 2 in the morning. If the story of the Witch of Parley's Hollow, or parts of it, sound familiar, that's because elements such as a strange or evil person or people living alone in a spooky old house that everyone is afraid of are some of the main ingredients in a lot of urban legends.
It just, took on a life of its own.
In preparing this episode, I asked random people online to tell me their stories of spooky houses they remembered as kids. One woman described a house in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where an older woman would cover her own car in newspapers and rocks and freak out if you walked by. Another person talked about an apartment complex said to be full of devil worshippers across the street from a Catholic high school. As a kid in California, I remember playing in a vacant lot when one of the kids there said, "I don't want to go over by the devil worshipper's house." This was quickly followed up by one of the other kids saying, "He kills people with his knives." When some of the braver or stupider kids with us did go over to wherever this house supposedly was, they came back saying they heard someone screaming. To me, the legend of the Witch of Parley's Hollow represents the fears that a lot of us might have had about a certain house where we grew up. However, unlike most of us and the people featured in that news article, Jennifer Jones wasn't afraid to go to the witch's house, at least what was left of it.
When you're in the hollow, you can see her cellar. There's tiles there. You can see where her house was. There's little bits and pieces of it left.
On this episode of That Doesn't Happen Every Day, in which we interview everyday people about things that don't normally happen every day, we follow one blogger on her quest to confront not only the Witch of Parley's Hollow, but the legend that turned her into one in the public eye.
Her name wasn't Crazy Mary. Her name was Loretta Dudler.
To get a feel for Loretta Dudler's circumstances, we're actually going to go back to the mid-1800s when Loretta's parents made the migration west to the Great Salt Lake.
They had moved to Utah in the, mid-1800s.
The Dudlers settled on the very eastern edge of the Salt Lake Valley in a hollow, or low spot, at the mouth of Parley's Canyon, named after LDS or Mormon leader Parley P. Pratt. It's unclear why exactly the Dudlers ended up in Utah. Generally, when you think of anyone moving to Utah in the 1800s, you assume it was to be part of the LDS migration there. However, I don't think the Dudlers were in fact LDS. Miss Dudler's eventual death was followed by a Catholic funeral. She sent her daughters to a Catholic school, and Mr. Dudler's funeral, along with that of his kids, didn't appear to have a clear affiliation with the LDS Church. So why would this family of Swiss-German descent leave Wisconsin for Utah? It's unclear, but here's what we do know about what they did when they settled in Parley's Hollow.
And so her father, he had the homestead, and then he kind of turned it into an inn. So, if people were passing through on their way to Salt Lake or on their way to Park City or wherever, they could stop at the Dudlers' homestead and, spend the night, get some food. And that turned into her father starting to brew his own beer, and then his beer actually got pretty successful, and so he had a saloon at the homestead. He had a saloon in Salt Lake City, at least one. But he was doing well.
You might think that Utah wouldn't be an ideal location to go into the beer business, but Salt Lake City was known as the crossroads of the West because of the numerous travelers of all backgrounds who went through it and to it. Miners, soldiers, and all kinds of people who were happy to slake their thirst. In fact, maybe some of them were in a desperate need for a drink after what they'd been through. Apparently there were other breweries in Utah, but maybe Mr. Dudler thought he could get in early on a growing trend. It's really not clear.
He added to the homestead, made it nicer. He kind of turned it into an actual inn.
The Dudlers had 7 children, and among them were Loretta, who the story is about, and Amelia, her sister.
The sister was like really pretty and talented, and I think everyone kind of thought, that this sister would like go on to just be something great. They were both sent to St. Mary's Academy for school. Loretta, when she was in school, she mastered the piano, the organ. She earned awards for her musical talent. Apparently, she had a beautiful singing voice.
In 1897, Joseph Dudler, the man who'd led his family to Utah, died in his early 70s. One record showed he'd suffered a long time with rheumatism. He left his inn and brewery to be run by his wife, Suzanne, now in her mid-60s, and his adult children, who still remained.
They started having trouble with the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Department in like 1898, so just a year after the father dies, because the Dudlers did not have the right to access the canal that was right near their house that was supplying their brewery with water. And keep in mind, like they had lived on this property since like 1864. This one particular night, the sheriff's department came and they waited till it was like midnight, 1 a.m., like middle of the night, and they were going to shut the canal off so that the water couldn't get to her brewery. And I don't know if like she got word that they were coming or like if she heard them outside or what, but she was not like having any of it, and took Loretta and her sons outside, and they basically stood there with like shotguns telling the sheriff like, you're not turning off our water. The sheriff and his deputies, they left pretty embarrassed because they had been run off by a woman. And long story short, Mrs. Dudler basically won the lawsuit against the city or the county, and she was able to maintain like her water rights.
A few years after the shotgun standoff with the sheriff, the obituary of the widow Dudler appeared in local papers. She died of pneumonia and apparently also had a broken hip that might have been a complicating factor. Meanwhile, Amelia, the beautiful and talented daughter, had also been getting her name in the paper.
She was addicted to alcohol, morphine, and cocaine. And she spent most of her short adult life cycling in and out of jail or prison. Like she was constantly getting arrested in Park City for drug use or, being drunk and disorderly.
In 1907, the Ogden, Utah Daily Sun wrote that the day before Halloween, the constant use of morphine and cocaine for many years caused the death of Miss Amelia Dudler Fredrickson at her home.
And it's kind of sad because her death certificate says that her death was natural. And then it says she was a morphine and cocaine fiend.
That news article wasn't any kinder, citing, the remains were in frightful condition. The body was covered with sores caused by repeated hypodermic injections of cocaine and morphine.
We know that Amelia and Loretta were like super close. And so in this like short period of time, she's lost her parents and her closest sister.
Loretta had also lost an older brother years before as well, but despite her losses, in 1907, she met someone.
She met a man named Harold Scher while she was living in Park City. They got married. He began to work at the family brewery. In 1911, Loretta and Harold apparently are still doing pretty good. They had a second son. His name was Charles. And on October 18th, 1912, Charles died at the age of 19 months from convulsions. And Loretta, after Charles' death, she was just never the same. She was just not the same person. And it was at that point in time where she began to pretty much just be a recluse and like not leave the house. So by 1930, we're going to jump like a bunch of years. Loretta's husband left her, and so the house fell into disrepair. And I think that's another part of this legend is her house like literally had the stereotypical haunted house look. And that's when, the legend started. Like the kids would get a glimpse of her and how weird she was. And like she was so harassed pretty much that it just made her not interact with people even more. And so it just like, just took on a life of its own.
And this is what got Jennifer interested in the real story about how a legend apparently transforms someone into a witch.
I'm kind of drawn towards like the underdog. And so when you see a woman from the 19th century and she's called a witch, it's usually because there's something else going on. And I always, I feel bad that these people are like said to be this, horrible witchy person when really they probably just had issues that they, couldn't deal with at the time because they didn't have treatment for it.
In fact, Jennifer's research uncovered more about Loretta's circumstances than any of the kids who went to gawk at her could have ever known.
It talks about Loretta basically having like severe anxiety problems from the time that she was 16. I mean, anxiety is miserable enough to deal with, but when you have all that other kind of stuff going on, she must have just been miserable. And I can't imagine having to deal with it back in like the 1890s, 1900s, when there's really no treatment that works.
Remember how Loretta's sister Amelia died from an overdose? I wonder if she had anxiety as well. Lots of the time, multiple members of the same family will have it. Could she have been given morphine by a doctor as a cure for anxiety and become hooked, or started to use it to try to self-medicate?
When I tell about who Loretta like was as a person and the things that she went through, it kind of makes like her behavior way more understandable.
Was Loretta maniacally playing her piano at night because she was a crazy witch? Or was she trying to soothe her own anxiety? I've known a lot of people who use creative outlets to try to deal with their depression and anxiety, and I wonder if honestly maybe poor Loretta just couldn't sleep and stayed up playing the piano to try to deal with things. By the mid-1940s, Loretta was moved to a nursing home in Salt Lake City, leaving her house abandoned.
Her house and like property was like the party spot for the local teens and stuff. And so, the cops would always find a bunch of teenagers out there drinking beer, doing whatever, getting into trouble. October 18th, 1952, which happens to be the same month and day that her baby son died years before. Actually, it was the 40th anniversary. So her house catches on fire. And at first you would think like, oh, I wonder if she like did it on purpose. But keep in mind, she's in the nursing home. So she's not anywhere near this house. So her house goes up in flames. It caused like a big to-do in the area. There was, newspapers saying that 1,500 people stopped to like watch this house burn. It's just completely destroyed. Everything in it was ruined. And they determined later that the fire was caused by vandals. So finally, on March 22nd, 1959, Loretta ended up passing away at the nursing home. All of her siblings and her estranged husband had all died before her, so her only living relative was her son, who was living in Las Vegas. Loretta was 88 years old. She had a super simple obituary. She's buried in an unmarked grave in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Salt Lake County actually set the house on fire and fully demolished it in 63 because they needed the land for the new freeway, I-80. This little hollow is still there. You can visit where she lived and her family lived, and there's signs up like historical markers and stuff, and part of her house is still there.
The cellar where Loretta's father presumably stored some of his beer is still there, lined with stones. It's now open to the sky, and one end has a narrow vault dug into the hillside.
She wasn't a witch. She was just a lady,
I want to thank Jen Jones for being on today's episode. Please check out her blog, The Dead History. I've linked it in the description. I've also linked Parley's Historic Nature Park if you'd like to check that out. Shout out to KHOL for playing the show. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do a search for That Doesn't Happen Every Day. Every day is 2 words in this case, podcast, and you can listen to every past episode completely for free. Thank you for listening. I hope to have a new episode to you in about 2 weeks.